Welcome to A Scrap Life, a podcast solely focused on the hustlers, grinders, operators, and business owners who live and breathe the scrap metal industry every day. Here is your host, Brett Eckhart.
All right, the trade is back. This time we're talking aluminum with Michael Anderson, with Schupan. And last month we got some good feedback out there. People were kind of, trying to understand the premium, the Midwest premium, how that works, and kind of how that's, the tariffs are affecting the markets. And not that a lot has changed in a month's time in aluminum. It hasn't traded quite as aggressively on a swing basis as say copper or silver or gold. Like it's not losing 40% overnight and then climbing back, but
Right.
it still has been a pretty interesting month. All things considered, we did this a month ago, give or take by 3 weeks, and things have changed, not in a big way, but things have changed, and you know. Trying to get this in once a month and just kind of let everybody know what the aluminum market's doing. So thanks for taking the time, Mike. I appreciate you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, no, and you mentioned, yeah, the swings that we've kind of seen here in copper, and that has been a driving force, like it's a rising tide raises all boats. Like when copper runs, all the other metals kind of follow suit. So aluminum's kind of been trailing that, and here recently it's been more kind of dominated by the strength of the dollar. But
Yeah.
since I think since our last podcast, we did see like a 20 cent upswing on aluminum, mostly because of the LME, a little bit because of the premium, and then it tailed back, and I think we're going to be in this kind of range bound area for a while. So we started the year at like 2,900 LME. We got up to 3,300 LME. Right now we're kind of right in between at 3050. And I continue to see us, probably for the foreseeable future, range bound in that 29 to 3,200. So I don't see any massive swings from like aluminum pricing perspective, uh,
Yeah.
changing, right? I think what you're probably going to end up seeing is more like we talked about last month, right? How you've got your benchmark aluminum price and then all the scraps that are traded at various percentages or discounts to that. I think
Yeah.
you'll probably see more movement in those discounts and percentages based on supply demand than you will in an overall change.
Actual LME and
Yep.
Midwest premium
Yep.
movement. So in your time, I think you said you've been at this for 18 roughly
Yeah.
years.
Yep.
Have you ever seen the price of aluminum with the premium included higher than it is today? Or I guess
It, it,
within this
it,
last month, the range hitting that 3,300.
no, no, have not. I mean, we are in uncharted territory, which,
Anytime you're selling any aluminum grade for over $2 feels like a big price, right? Like
yeah,
anything over $2, and that means any grade is still. I mean, I remember selling aluminum sheet for literally 25 to 30 cents a pound. Like,
yeah,
you know, it's not,
yeah,
and that doesn't seem like that was all that long ago. Um, so to sell, and I don't know, I'm just for rough math purposes, aluminum sheet today should be old sheet 2%, should be in that 98 to $1 range, give or take, right?
yep, yep,
So anytime you're selling old sheet for $1, I feel like is a pretty good number.
yeah, yeah. No, it is. So like, yeah, overall terminal numbers are really good, right? Like when you look at
Yeah.
the price that I'm getting for the scrap. But if you try to tie that to what the Midwest transaction is and look at it
Yeah.
historically, you're like, that doesn't add up. Like this used to trade at 90% and now it's 60% or whatever, right? Like,
Yeah.
great
But
example,
anyways, go ahead. So like
like the old,
60% is a big that's a big
sure.
I don't know, spread, I would lack of a better
Yeah.
term, but 60% versus 90%. But when you're talking about $2 and what 40, what roughly
243, 243 today.
243, aluminum, like that's 60% of that is still a pretty big number. So
It it is, and it's really interesting to kind of see which grades and commodities have held up since the beginning of, it was back in June of last year that Trump announced that 232 was going to increase to 50%. And
Yeah.
since, around that time, I think the Midwest transaction was just under $1.50. Now we're just under $2.50. So you've
Mm.
seen a dollar climb in the Midwest transaction. But, as far as that spread widening that I was talking about, like some grades have held up well. Like 5052 has moved like 4 or 5%. UBC
Right.
have moved down. Like it
Down.
wasn't. Yeah, they were. It was like it was trading in the low 90s, like 92, 93%.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
And today it's like in the 88, 89%
And is that
range.
because of is it because of the say 20 cent run up? I mean, is that where that gets factored in? Is they take 5% off that? Is it because there was an extra 20 cent run up in the Midwest premium?
No, so typically what you see historically as overall metal prices increase, that spread does
Hmm.
widen out. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but if you think about it, like mills are melting scrap and they're only getting a certain part of recovery. And so
Okay.
there's a melt loss portion. So, it's natural to see a widening on a percentage basis of Midwest transaction as that number goes up. But for benchmark comparison, so if you've got like 5052, widened out 5%, you've got UBC that widened 30%. It
Mm.
was
Yeah.
70% of Midwest transaction in May of last year, and it's 50, just under 50% now.
And why
Or that's 20%.
UBC's like
Sorry.
yeah, but why that grade specific grade? Because when you think about all the aluminum used in the world, right, you have to think that UBC grade material because it's mostly going back into can sheet again, right?
Yeah,
I
100%.
mean, for the most part. So, and that doesn't feel like that market is necessarily slowed down on a volume basis. If anything, it's maybe picked up some steam.
Hmm.
So you would kind of tend to think that there would be some strength in that UBC market, not losing strength, right? And so what causes that, Michael, from your standpoint?
So it kind of gets back to some of the things that we touched on last month, but like it's supply demand, and
Okay.
so the demand hasn't, to your point, hasn't gone away, right? Like we're
Hmm.
still making can sheet in this country, you know, uh, ignoring some hot mill outages and things like that. It's still a very very robust market here in the U.S. But the supply side has picked up exponentially. Um,
Oh,
and that's because of 232 and the premium. So the premium, is now at just under $1.04. Um, and so aluminum pricing in the US is much, much higher than it is in other regions around the world.
hmm.
So, cans that are generated in Europe or generated in Mexico or generated in Central America, they want to ship to the US because even with
Oh.
additional freight costs, they can get more for their money selling into the US than they can selling in their local markets.
So
And
it's not
so,
necessarily the finished good that's driving, like it's not like we're importing canned sheet, like finished material ready to be made into new cans. It's the actual scrap that's coming from these other countries that's putting the pressure on those markets. That may, that makes sense.
right.
That's easy. That's even easy for a dummy like me to understand.
Yeah, no, yeah, and that's that's really been one of the things that we've all seen with this run up in the premium. The premium in North America or the U.S. being as high as it is, and not changing in other regions because the 232 is a local thing. You've seen the U.S. become a scrap magnet, and it's not just for I think UBC were like the first things that were imported. We saw a flurry of activity when the premium started to rise, of
Hmm.
cans being imported into this country, and that started the I guess supply avalanche, I'll call it. Um,
Yeah.
but we've seen it in other in other aspects as well. I mean, there's tons of extrusion coming out of Mexico that
Hmm.
are flooding into the, and then, so if you looked at like extrusion pricing in the like southern region versus the Midwest region, there's a pretty big price discrepancy because there's a lot more supply down south.
A
So
lot of
much
extrusion plants and a lot of like manufacturing, right, in Mexico with
there is.
extrusion. So, and
Yep.
UBCs make sense to me because UV aluminum can is pretty universal across the world, right? For the most part, like it's probably the most universal, aluminum product that you're going to see out there, like that each country will have, right? Where
Yep.
like like you say, like, extrusion, you're going to see, strong extrusion markets in Mexico or anywhere there's like say window or door frame, whatever type of manufacturing, right? So I could that makes sense to me. UBCs make sense to me. What about like other grades? Are there any other grades out there that are kind of country or continent specific that kind of might people might find interesting, like when you think about it, or is it just kind of like you say all grades, all of a sudden it starts with UBCs, moves to extrusions. What's next? Like what do you see next after that?
Yeah, it is interesting. So like you haven't seen, and I think what I won't kind of keep it by grade, but I think what you find is items that aren't locked up under contract and that can travel further, things that are typically bailed, things that are generated on an on-demand basis, that it's hard to forecast and annually sell. You see those much more available, right? And I think those are like so like UBC, MLC, painted siding. You've seen the pricing on all of those have diminished significantly. Like siding before pre 50% tariff, siding was like 77% of Midwest, and today it's
Hmm.
44%. So,
Yeah,
I mean, it just, it's, but, not a
it's
lot of
a
people contract
common,
siding.
yeah, common item. And how about, and this is something we've never discussed, but how about like guys that are running auto shredders and big shredders, and they make a product what called Twitch, right?
Mhm. Yep.
That's an aluminum based product. Is that how does that pricing compare out there in the market compared like relatively? Because is that an item that Schupan sees, deals with, or handles
It
much
is.
of?
It
Okay.
is. And I'd say probably not until maybe a year and a half ago, because Schupan doesn't have any auto shredders.
Yeah.
I historically our forte and strength has been on the wrought grade primary aluminum packages.
Hmm.
Your MLCs, 3003, 1100 extrusion, whatnot. But yeah, we have an international trading division. So we do deal with Zorba. Twitch to a lesser degree, but
Hmm.
it's just same thing upgraded. And yeah, but the pricing there is different because that goes into what's like a secondary aluminum market, right?
Yeah. More like
Um,
your cast
which are
houses type deal, right?
your
Yeah.
cast
Because it
alloy.
is a lot of cast, right? I mean, it's a mixed grade. Like what was the true technical spec of a Twitch? It's got a lot of 380 cast in it. It's got a lot. I mean, it's a mix of
380,
what?
356, and then any of the like automotive sheet alloys that are in there. So it's
Yeah.
a
So it's a
it's
real
a
blended kind of grade.
it is. Yeah, and there's it's interesting. There's a lot of talk. I think if you were probably at REMA last year, there was a lot of talk about separation of, the
Yeah.
technologies out there today to start separating out the cast fraction from the wrought fraction, right? And
Hmm.
starting to upgrade that material. And I think that's something that we're going to see uh, over I'm sure we'll talk about it, the balance of the year
Yeah. It
and
feels like
further.
you're hearing more about that lately, right? These XRF type systems that are, used to be obviously with the handheld guns. Now it's like you're seeing it on these belt driven XRF, like, the Steiners of the world and the Red Waves and the people that are like really digging
Tomra,
deep
all
into that. Yeah, Tom, they're digging deep into those systems, and you can start to see. because when you start talking about those differences in spreads, and the reason why I bring that up is from a premium standpoint. I mean, you're getting a significantly higher number, definitely a larger percentage of
Sure.
the pie if you can get the cast out of it, right?
And yeah, and probably even more so if you take it a step further, right? Because you look at like what MLC today is 44% of Midwest, but if you can upgrade it and if you've got a lot of 50/52 in there, well, that's close to 90% or 88,
So then does
89%.
that come out to like a blended price? Will it, because do they say, okay, if it's 44 MLC, and is it just like, here's the lowest, this is like what you get, everything else is maybe a slightly better, but not enough to move the needle?
Yeah, most places look at MLC the same. If it's a mixed alloy, it's a mixed alloy, and you gotta have to treat
Okay.
it as such. Um,
Okay.
if you're dealing with like a certain known supply that's very static and it's a mixture of this and this and it's always a consistent ratio, you might be able to get a slight premium for that. Um,
Hmm.
but but generally speaking, no. What like mixed alloys are mixed alloys, and
Okay.
those as MLC. But as I think the scrap industry evolves, that separation technology that we're just talking about is going to become more and more prevalent. And I think you're going to see a lot of things getting upgraded to the highest value commodity that it can. So you're
Yeah.
going to start seeing these aluminum fractions getting split into cast and wrought, and then maybe from there down the line you'll see that get split a little bit further. Like the cast is not just you'll split the 380 from the 356 and the 319, and then you may do the same thing on the wrought side. So it's
Well, value drives technology, right? Like,
100%.
premium, like if I remember, it wasn't that long ago when, I mean, it's really truly wasn't that long ago when people were shredding cars or shredding appliances and just magging off the steel, and everything else went to the landfill, right? And then they figured out how to put eddy currents on the backside, and then so they took off the aluminum fraction, and then they figured out, that I think what then I to go through my history and like really look at it. I'm not a huge history buff, but I think probably it went to density separation via water and flotation, and then kind of got away from that a little bit and moved more into these finders and these XRFs, and then they could find the wire, and then all of a sudden, like it's starting to really like technology is being driven by the value of these materials and these commodities, right? And versus digging a hole and mining it out of the ground. And so it's super cool. It's like we're in a really cool time to like watch all this develop. And I try not to take anything for granted. Like I don't have a shredder, so it's like I don't really, but I pay attention just because I'm super fascinated by the technology and by the process of like what's really going into these
Yeah.
large shredding systems nowadays. The downstream is a significantly bigger investment than the shredder is, right? I mean, as a complete package, it's a huge investment, but it used to be like, well, if you're going to put in this shredder, like you're missing the boat by not, almost doubling your investment, and then some on the downstream, it feels like. So,
And what helps drive that, right, is $2.40 aluminum.
yeah, it sure doesn't hurt the cost.
Right?
It drives a lot of people. Yeah, it drives a lot of different things, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you said you had a couple things you wanted to potentially put up on the screen and share. I'd love to see it, man. This is our second one doing this aluminum trade, and I'm
Yep.
already learning more stuff. So fire away on me. What do you got?
Okay. If I could find out how to share it, that's what
Okay.
I'm. Oh, here we
Well,
go.
but while you're
I
figuring
got.
it out, tell me what you're going to share.
Yeah. So it was just a real kind of high level. Some of the things that I spoke to. Right,
Okay.
with the uh, you know, with the change of 232 and kind of what we've seen from a pricing change perspective. Um,
Okay.
so I don't know. Is this coming through?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah. So it's just kind of, and it's not fancy by any stretch, right? But it's kind of shows what you've seen, so that you kind of show the from May through February, the change in Midwest transaction, and then how the percentage of all of those different scrap grades has fallen, but it's not equitable across all of them, right? And I
Yeah.
think what we've seen is we've seen UBC kind of actually bottomed out in October, November last year, and
Okay.
as the calendar turned, pricing kind of started to solidify and strengthen around like the 49-50% range,
Yep. I see
which is
that.
actually really really interesting. And it's stayed at that level. Like 52's kind of stayed pretty static. 1100 3003 have as well. But extrusion, which held in fairly well through most of last year, has started to tail off. And it's just kind of funny to see how different different markets are
And
impacted, and it's not one carte blanche across the entire aluminum industry. So
And what you think is driving that, your opinion, is that the ability to import these grades against our domestic pricing, right? And that's the biggest driver is the scrap flow availability coming in. Because obviously 5052 is a very specific grade of
right.
material, and it's, a prime type rot grade, correct? If I say the terminology. So is that, and it's not necessarily a super plentiful grade
It's
on
not.
the outside of the United States. And there are obviously some other countries that are creating that and producing that,
And it
but
has a lot of
maybe
different
not at the level
um,
that we are here.
yeah, and it has a lot of different uses as well, where like 60/20 or 50/52 will go back into 50/52 itself. It's also used
Hmm.
a lot in the extrusion industry as a mag adder.
Yeah.
Instead of using, mag additions, they will use a scrap mag adder, and it's a much cheaper cost. But 50/52
Okay.
is about the only item that they can use because it's got low manganese, so it doesn't mess up the chemistry of the other extrusion that they're making. But yeah, 100%. I think this is the supply side is driving kind of what we've seen here on these changes.
The
Um,
siding one is big. I mean, you see that. I mean, from a 76,
yeah,
percent to 44, that's a really big swing. I'm looking through some of these, and that's 32%, right? Difference versus, some of them are in the 23% difference. It is pretty, the 3003 it has held up fairly well, and the fifty
yep,
fifty two has really held up, well. And 63 is interesting. I mean, the 6063 pricing today is still pretty good, but it has taken its lumps on a
yeah.
percentage basis as well.
And
So,
yeah, so there's a supply side, and I think what we're seeing a little bit on the 63 price degradation here recently has
hmm.
been maybe maybe on the demand side. I don't know that automotive is quite as robust. The building and construction is not going gangbusters. There's a lot of things I think um, there are a lot of extrusion goes into data centers, and with the AI push, and there's a lot of demand in that segment right now. But I think something that's going to be interesting to keep an eye on would be moving forward is kind of like the Fed interest rates, right? The
Okay.
current chair Jerome Powell's been pretty steadfast in wanting to hold interest rates where they're at, and not rush too much into cutting interest rates for fear that inflation might rear its ugly head again. But he's stepping out as Fed chair in
In
May.
May, correct? Yeah.
Yep. And his replacement, Kevin Warsh, is handpicked by Trump, and Trump's been very, very vocal about wanting lower interest rates. And so
Hmm.
you can kind of look at a lot of markets and see there's there's probably not there's a not a great chance that there's a rate cut prior to Powell leaving, but
Yeah.
The
It's
question is,
super interesting, like the people, the conclusions that people draw, to Trump's pick of Warsh, that he's just a hawk, right? He's traditionally like a rate hawk, and they're like, but Trump has been so vocal, in fact, about cutting the rates. Like, do you really think he would pick somebody
no chance,
to
no
fight
chance.
that fight like 4 to 5 months before the primary? He's like, it doesn't make like I mean, I just people, the way that the metals, commodities, stock market is traded, it's so momentum driven, not necessarily like reality driven. Like maybe we shouldn't be the pricing as high as it is today in a lot
Yeah,
of commodities, in the first place. So it's just people kind of like coming back to reality. But if you don't blame that on a decision,
yeah,
like that's a misplaced blame, I think.
yeah, yeah. No, I would be very shocked if there haven't been, behind the scenes conversations and understandings around what Kevin's
Yeah.
first orders are when he's when he's
Yeah.
in the Fed chair. So, um,
Absolutely.
the other
Well,
thing
I
to keep.
appreciate that. What else should we keep an eye on out there? What do you
Yeah,
got?
I mentioned this last month, and the Supreme Court, the reciprocal tariffs, right? So
Yep.
Section 232 kind of applies to all aluminum, scraps excluded from that. But there are some tariffs if you're going to import scrap into the U.S. from other countries. So the U.S. Canada and Mexico are excluded if you're USMCA compliant.
Hmm.
And the tariffs are smaller than 50% generally. Um, if you're importing, say, cans from Europe or Africa. But there are tariffs associated. The economics today still, drive forward with bringing that material to the U.S. But
Yeah.
there's been some legal questioning around the legality of those reciprocal tariffs, and the Supreme Court was supposed to rule, or has been uh, they've been reviewing it, and there's no real clear cut when they're going to rule on it. Some people thought it might have been in January. So I mentioned this on the podcast then. I think that,
Yep.
the earliest they may come to revisit it would be like February 20th. But I guess I mentioned that just to say that we talked about the supply avalanche and why scrap spreads have widened. If 232 is struck down, or not 232, I'm sorry, if the reciprocal tariffs are struck
Reciprocal
down,
tariffs. Yeah.
then basically that removes one additional
Barrier of
restriction,
entry. Yeah.
which would only mean that you're going to find more and more material coming to the
So the
U.S.
spreads will widen farther, right? Do you feel like, I
Exactly.
mean, you're going to get a bigger, because you're going to have now an even more motivating factor to bring in imported scrap, right?
Yep.
To supply those needs, as
Yeah.
long as the Midwest premium sits at where it is today, and as long
Right.
as, the LME and the COMEX or the aluminum sits where it sits today, then like you said, if you wipe out, 10% or 15% or whatever, that depends on the country, reciprocal tariff. I
Yep.
mean, you could pretty much just calculate that right into the value of scrap on a domestic level.
Yep.
So, because you're going to get that pressure either way. So, well, that's good to know. I'm glad. Like I always say, I do these podcasts because I get a lot out of it. Um, and I get some feedback. Other people are getting something out of it. So I
Yep.
appreciate you taking the time. And thanks for the chart. For people that
Yeah.
have any questions, or they have any material that they're looking for some pricing on, or just any aluminum questions in general, feel free to reach out to Michael. I'm sure he'd
Sure.
love to talk to you. But
100%.
until next month, until we meet again, sir,
Yep.
then I do appreciate you taking the time and dropping some knowledge on us, some aluminum knowledge on us today.
My pleasure. Yep. All good.
Appreciate you, sir. Have a great today's Friday, so have a great
Yeah.
weekend, and I'll talk to you in a month.
All right. Sounds good.
All right, take care.